Okay, good morning. You're going to hear some roosters bid you the same. So, for today, we're going to get a chance to look at the social, historical, environmental, and external lines that either influence or are just as affected by what happens within. We particularly went through the similar thought process of Jacques Lacan and Lev Vygotsky, both of whom provide a good bridge for us to now walk into the mind of both Walter Ong and Marshall McLuhan, who provides for us a more functional way of understanding the unfoldment of mind throughout time. A lot of the previous videos looked more at the unfoldment of mind through space, especially where language brings to us a sense of deep structure that as we shift our awareness, these expanded states basically show us that we are just as space-oriented, just as we are time-oriented. There is a shifting from one space to another, but that the shifting takes place almost simultaneously, where each quadrant plays against each other. They coexist, and so if one aspect wasn't there, a sense of balance would be felt as absent. So welcome to today's process, and thank you again for keeping pace. I promised that we would shed some light into the work of an important man who more or less just elegantly simplifies what a lot of us intuitively know. So we're going to be looking at the shifting of awareness as we move away from one element towards another, and as we go into the extremes of both, there is a kind of synthesis. This Hegelian notion of the thesis and the antithesis coming together, that there seems to be a kind of conjunction that is very much featured in our time, in the present moment, in this current incarnation we call the 21st century. We looked at this triadic relationship held for us largely by Jacques Lacan's three orders, which are the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. And so far, we've been mapping these out in the innerdance journey as three different parts, three different sections. Namely, that the real is situated at the meeting point of all duality, and on the left side of the horizontal axis, that we hold the imaginary, which is quite an exclusive place to be in if you think about it, that there are no spaces for the unitive here on this side. One is not higher or lower than the other, but they are merely two different sides that create the coin. Like, you can't have a coin without both different sides. And so we understand, and we're able to map out that inner dance actually exists in some kind of middle space between the real and the imaginary. So with that, let's go back to the triadic. the three-order chart that we have here that compares the work of three different people, Lacan, Vygotsky, and Walter Ong. So we are looking at these. If you were to ask, what is the point? What are these? What are we looking at? So for now, there's very much a sense of movement or evolution where we're mainly interested in how does mind develop. Primarily because when we go deep enough into inner dance, when we try to understand and not just experience inner dance, we get a sense that the inner dance is just as much a deconstructive process as much as it is a constructive one. Such is the case with most modalities that brings transcendence about. If we understand the hierarchy of needs and motivations made popular by Abraham Maslow, there is a very deep human need to go beyond the sense of actualization, the I am. It connotes an achievement of a desire, a dream, coming into success or satisfaction as opposed to failure. There is a going beyond these dualities that were planted in a ladder-like fashion, maybe when we were toddlers or when we were babies. We would hear these words, and as we grow up, they shift from early childhood towards going to school, doing these exams, and further enhancing how our brain starts to come into a more programmed or conditioned way of responding to external stimuli, very much alluded by Pavlov and B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist and classical conditioning psychologists who feel that the mind is more like a machine, and you can train children to become what we would model them to be in very control-oriented fashions. We know that that is not as easy as we might think. Inner dance very much provides a space where we can honor not just the I am. Transcendence is very much a process of negating identifications, conditionings, things that we think we're bound to, tethers, attachments, judgments, and resistance. So that the downward motions that we see in the wave, whether it be the circadian wave or the Vesica Pisces, models for us what this process holds, almost a strategy for a successful shifting, which takes a lot of energy descending and energy ascending, a lot of involution and evolution taking place at the same time. So we go to the work of Walter Ong to understand certain reasons why things are the way they are, and the way he outlines things provides a very important gateway to explaining why the trance could go so deep sometimes. There is an inquiry that does open up. As we experience the deeper layers of mind, there are always these paradoxical arrows. Are we headed somewhere? Like, where are we going? What is the destination? But at the same time, we get a sense of our historical frames, that we seem to be coming from somewhere. In the inner dance, there's a lot of memories. We begin to remember what it was like to be a child, or what it was like to be a caveman. We remember what it was like maybe to be minerals. Whether we witness children or old people, it is very common for people to speak about a memory of the earth, there is such an arising of that sort of memory, and there is a recall of certain patterns that does allow us to hold what seems to be impossibly vast into something that is actually quite simple. So there is a way in which things triangulate, especially where normally two different points find some kind of meeting ground, this Hegelian notion of a synthesis. So primary orality speaks of the origins of mind before the advent of the printing press, the orientation that we have on books. So when you go to school, the primary medium of interrelating with the vast amounts of knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge in the cosmic library upon which we awaken to every day and are asked to contend with. We engage the world prior to the time when books contained what universes have lived through. We lived more in the age of the archaic, the magical, or the mythical. Were we to borrow some of the stages that Jean Gebser outlines in his spiral dynamics, primary orality was the age of the dialogue as the primary channel upon which we mediated the world, both inside and outside. And with the invention of the printing press, there was a shifting of our locus of wisdom into book form. We basically understand that books do not act or respond in the same way as dialogue is so much more feedback oriented. So it's easy to get a sense as we go deeper into the conversations around inner dance that there seems to be, not just within inner dance, but in a lot of new neo-spiritual traditions that are emerging around the world, that there is a return back to primary orality. When you notice there is such a great interest in going back into the drum circles, you see how people are reorienting themselves into sacred movement through different kinds of dancing in trance-like states, or the great interest people have in psychotropic plants as a portal into expanded states of awareness. It was Terence McKenna who talked about the archaic revival, the return back to roots, the return back to the nonlinear. It was the whole point of looking at the outline of Jacques Lacan that allows us to imagine where a lot of the work is taking place upon this return to the world of symbols and primal signs that help us to see what is going on beneath and underneath this network of the many different lines, geometries, images, sounds, songs, noises that we're exposed to every day. But there is a deep structure that is just emerging and revealing itself to us. Father Walter Ong's work then is quite useful, and I suggest maybe you look into it as well as the work of his teacher Marshall McLuhan. So what is outlined in many of the writings presented by Walter Ong and McLuhan is that there is a sense of loss through the shifting from orality into literacy, one of which is the shift from the magic brought to us by the ear, the vibratory dominant organ that was then replaced with the neutrality and the objectivity given to us by the eye, or the literal sense organ. So Ong further points out that when words are printed, they kind of lose a sense of magic, and as they go into the linear, printed words are basically static, maybe even dead in some ways, that they lose not just the sense of the magical nested layers of meaning that we know of as nonlinear unfoldment over space, that spoken words, oral tradition, dialogue, it actually holds a lot more of the innate tension that we experience in the realm of the imaginary, on its way to the meeting point, the unitive state brought to us when we enter into the sense of the real. And so one key notion that we see in the age of primary orality is that not only does it bring a sense of aliveness in the way we engage the world, there is also a homeostatic aspect upon which dialogue seeks to bring out the points of conjunction. In a way, this is what modern technology kind of brings to us. As we feel more and more the complexities as we enter into the age of information, we are, in fact, being ushered as well into an age where connections take place. Were we to follow that, dialogue does have that quality of bringing about a forward motion into the realm of the unitive. This is one of the intrinsic messages that the Vesica Pisces brings to us. So with that, let's look at homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Okay, so homeostasis we might be able to understand by bringing up once again the subject of substances. What some people might call drugs might be any substance that we could ingest, and the possibilities are infinite. We don't have to just look at illegal substances, what we call drugs. Almost anything that we eat, anyone we speak to, anything we embrace, anything we encounter on a daily basis shifts the arrows, so that the autonomic nervous system goes into a rhythm, a rhythmic journey that goes up, that goes down, that goes left, that goes right. And we see that happening as our brains shift on a daily basis. Look at Ned Herman's model. Sometimes we're more dominant in upper left A quadrant. Sometimes we're more dominant as organizers when we're not being logicians. Sometimes it seems more important to be more feeling-based and to go into the energetic dialogue that brings about cohesion between the ego and the ourselves as consciousness. And sometimes we're more into bringing everything together into the sense of the holistic, intuitive, integrative, and synthesizing. So onto this conversation around homeostasis. We, in the past video, talked about stimulants. Stimulants are substances that activate the sympathetic nervous system. And depressants are the substances that activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic, or that which goes up, would be the fight or flight responses, as opposed to the rest and digest responses. So they seem to participatorily or actively come together in some kind of homeostasis when we understand the natural way in which the body seeks balance. We looked at this in the subject of cognitive dissonance and the fear avoidance cycle, that when we experience some kind of dissonance or discomfort, such as pain, there are two ways in which we respond, either in fear or in courage. They're both coming from the same intent, that we would like to achieve some kind of harmonious balance. And one word that we can use to describe this is homeostasis. So let's go over what some people experience when they take these substances that we are now seeking to understand. When we largely create daily patterns that maybe wakes us up. So for example, people who become very attached or addicted to substances that stimulate the central nervous system, what we call stimulants that activate the sympathetic nervous system. So they could be things like caffeine, sugar, methamphetamine, nicotine. These are substances that basically activate that which rises up. And we normally feel that as the beta state, the wakeful state. In energy process, this is actually awakening fear, maybe in ways that contract us, but also bring us into a defensive, active, but also creative mode. So you might see people who need to wake up because they have some kind of deadline or they have some kind of work mode that they need to work on. So they need to drink a lot of coffee, they need to drink soft drinks, or they need to take in carbohydrates, as opposed to people who need to relax. Maybe they're drinking chamomile tea, or at the start of a weekend they start drinking beer, or they start drinking hard liquor, because those relaxants do have powerful effects on the human body. So people who start to regulate their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems at certain times of the day, they start to institute certain patterns, so that even with illegal drugs, there's a reason why people would take their cocaine or their methamphetamine, their heroin, only with certain people at very definite places, and that they also do it at certain times of the day. There's a reason for that. It's because of homeostasis. When the body knows, for example, that, oh, okay, he's going to take his coffee, it's 7:30 in the morning, or he's about to take a certain drug and it's in the afternoon, the human body automatically expects that you are going to heighten an energy inside that it needs to deal with. So if it knows that you're going to take something at a certain time, it activates the opposite, the opposing or the complementary polarity. So let's say you're going to take a stimulant. It will basically enact the parasympathetic or the depressant reaction in order to balance out the incoming hyper stimulant that you're about to take in, so that you don't go too far. And this is one of the reasons why drug addicts become tolerant of certain substances, so that the next time they take in a certain drug or a certain food, a certain drink, it doesn't affect them so much. It's because the body is seeking to balance things out. And this is precisely the reason why certain people overdose. It normally happens when they change the time of day, or they change the place, or they start to hang out with different people. The effects of the substance increases exponentially because of the inability of the body to achieve homeostasis. So then, going back to this board that speaks about what Walter Ong and Marshall McLuhan points out to us, is that when we shifted from the age of primary orality into the age of literacy, more or less the shifting from the right brain which unfolds over space, as opposed to the left brain, which is the unfoldment of the mind over time. That which is more, primary orality basically is more parallel. It's more synchronic, as opposed to the diachronic unfoldment that is more sequential, meaning in language we use one word at a time to go over the entire paragraph or the whole book, as opposed to in the way that dialogue unfolds things simultaneously. Like when you listen to the feedback process going on within conversations, there's a lot more that is felt and conveyed, as opposed to the static way upon which the printed word doesn't allow such a feedback mechanism that the ear brings us, as opposed to the literal way upon which the eye holds our awareness at bay. Innerdance then provides a sort of resonant key that helps us to understand how we are shifting back into the realm or the order of the real, in a way that we are now, as a collective, are shifting into secondary orality. So secondary orality is the return to the world of orality, but with the egoic development that literacy does allow for us. Now we see a greater balance between the right hemisphere awareness, and now that we've also developed rationally the left hemisphere of awareness, secondary orality is primarily brought about by modern media. Modern media, just like primary orality, helps us engage with the world in a much more interactive way, in the sense that so many points of connections are now possible. When you open the internet, you open your cell phone, you turn on your laptop, you are able to access the field, the greater field awareness, the synchronic spaciousness that holds so much nested layers, meaning that intuitive people are so much more aware of, not just in the present moment, but getting always these hits, these energetic inputs that seem to correlate past, present, and future together in a much more open and intuitive sense. So, as a way of closing, we've been looking at the vesica piscis through this idea of the homeostasis that balances out both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. When we spoke about this in a previous video, we looked at the third category of substance that we ingest that brings about the greater awareness of the life world map, the life review process that happens during the near-death experience. The psychedelic phenomena is the simultaneous action of the upward movement and the downward movement that we see represented by both the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So in a way, it is a kind of homeostatic feature that both primary orality and secondary orality holds for us. And we see that much of our current attention in the world, as we live so much in the imaginary, is held here on the left part of the x-axis. As we move towards the sensing of the real, that is what homeostasis brings us. There is an aspect of the inner dance that is actually not homeostatic, that it doesn't speak to us that we need now to be here in a sense of center or a sense of heart or a sense of transcendence at the with dominance placed on the crown chakra, or that we need to be rooted and grounded in earth right now. Homeostasis is a kind of fear avoidance as well. The need to achieve harmony and achieve balance through the eyes of Robert Letham's fear avoidance cycle, as well as the many things cognitive dissonance speak to us, that basically when cognitions do not match, the human mind strives for a kind of harmonious existence, and so we tend to hide, and we tend to trivialize, we tend to modify certain cognitions in order for us to avoid the discomfort, thus leading us into a kind of avoidance and depression and dystrophy, atrophy of certain parts of the body, whether it be the emotional body, the physical body, the mental body. So in this way of looking at the vesica Pisces, then, it's both homeostasis of what is homeostatic and what is not homeostatic that successfully leads us into the unitive real, the Lacanian real, and the unitive destination. Actually doesn't look for balance sometimes, that it is important to also respect the imaginary parts held here at the left, because there are certain things that are being held according to our deeper purpose and birth visioning, so that one way to look at the realm of the symbolic, which is this range over here, oh hello cat, is how the dream state doesn't just hold polarity within the x-axis, but it also holds our need to experience and to understand the spectrum of the y-axis, the up and down regions, and not just the journeying to the left and right, thus clarifying what Ned Herman's whole brain model is speaking about, where there's the spaces at the left, spaces at the right, spaces at the top and at the bottom, as something that represents cerebral mode thinking, as complemented also by limbic mode thinking that is being balanced out as we reach for and strive for that point in the middle. Okay, so I think that's enough for today. I think we've gone past our 30 plus minute mark that I try to be conscious of. So in the next video, I hope to find more energy and insight to bring us back or deeper into the ideas and key notions that Jacques Lacan, especially how he evolved psychoanalysis, might have for us now that we've more or less completed our sensing or introductory sensing of these triadic relations between the work of the cognitive developmental theorist Vygotsky, the anthropologist and sociologist Walter Ong, as well as the philosophical quandaries brought to bear by Jacques Lacan, who developed some of the questions given to us, presented to us by the work of Sigmund Freud. So thank you again for sticking. So thank you again for staying with me on this vision quest into innerdance process, and I hope to hear from you. We're going to move to Maya tomorrow to finish up energy school before I move on over to Davao in Mindanao, where certain things are happening as well. So thank you, and hope to see you again. Goodbye.